Hello friends, this is Niladri Mohapatra once again. Greetings of the day to everyone. Today we'll talk about sprint planning, what exactly the sprint planning meeting is and the different benefits of it, and how we'll do a sprint planning inside a meeting room or in a distributed team step by step. And let's see what's the agenda we have today. So we will talk about what is sprint planning, then we'll talk about different roles and responsibility of the Scrum roles for sprint planning. Then we'll talk about what are the prerequisites we may have for effective sprint planning, and how much time a sprint planning meeting take, and then we'll talk about step by step inside the sprint planning meeting what we do, what are the different steps we do to have a sprint planning meeting. And then we'll talk about what are the expected deliverable from a sprint planning, what's the outcome from the sprint planning meetings, what we get after the sprint planning meeting is completed. And then we'll talk about the summary report of sprint planning meeting. It's a kinds of minutes of meeting, what we send and what are the information we circulate to everyone on the interested parties to let everyone know what exactly the sprint planning meeting extract is for any individual sprint. And finally we'll talk about few benefits of sprint planning meeting. So those are the agenda of today for the sprint planning meeting. Let's begin on understanding what is sprint planning. Okay, so apart from this particular video, you can actually browse through the article that I have written to go through step by step if you are unable to watch video or you want to read. So you can simply go to agiledigest.com and you will be able to find that sprint planning meeting details under this particular menu. Once you will click it, it will be ready here, and then you can browse through all the different articles and points that I am talking about in details with pictorial descriptions, and also you will able to find the videos at the end of this article. So here you will be able to read the details article if you are a person who loves reading. Okay, let's get back to our slide and talk about what is sprint planning. So what is sprint planning? So sprint planning actually we do for all sprint. Before starting the sprint, we need to define the context of that sprint. We need to define the scope of that sprint, where we are making a bunch of stories or product backlog items to make a potential increment to our product. So this meeting is actually defining the scope. Each sprint should have a sprint planning meeting at the beginning of the sprint, and from there we start the sprint. So let's talk about the roles and responsibility of sprint planning meetings. We know the main roles in a agile Scrum team are product owners, Scrum masters, and development team. So let's see what is their roles and responsibility in a sprint planning meeting. So first let's talk about before the sprint planning meeting, before starting the sprint planning meeting, what are the different roles and responsibility we have, and first try to find out what are the roles we have. So we have product owner, we have a space for product owner where we can have their roles and responsibility. We have Scrum masters, and they have their own areas where they will be having their roles and responsibility. And we have our development team who's also participate very actively in sprint planning meeting, and they have their areas. And we can also have a third party members where they will be having their roles and responsibility. So before sprint planning, what the roles the product owner have? So they can define a sprint goal or define a vision of sprint, what they exactly are expecting from the upcoming sprint. They will be doing a prioritization of the backlog. They will take participation on grooming and help the team understand what exactly the requirement of individual product backlog item is. Now let's talk about Scrum Master's role. The Scrum Masters, before starting the sprint, define the team capacity with the help of team and define all the meetings that required to have the sprint planning successful. So one of the meeting can be capacity planning meeting and the sprint planning meeting itself. The development team, they define their individual capacity. So team capacity, when we talk about this team capacity and individual capacity, the Scrum Master and the team sits together and finalize the capacity of the entire team for one particular sprint. And they also go through the product backlog item to find an idea of what are the upcoming sprints they have on the current upcoming sprint. And let's talk about during the sprint planning. So what the roles and responsibility we have. So product owner definitely finalize the sprint goal with collaboratively with the development team, and Scrum Masters also passed sprint details and the goals, and that way they finalize a sprint goal. It is actually one of the many visions of product owner that have from the product owner's list and finalize, okay, for this particular sprint what is the sprint goal. Product owner also clarify doubts if there is any stories came up or the product backlog items came up, those are not cleared earlier or needs grooming, then product owner can also clarify doubts at the time of sprint planning also. And also the product owner navigate stories in priority. What does that mean is, in the product backlog item there will be, let's say, hundreds of stories or 100 of product backlog items we have, which story to pick if that is not prioritized, or after even prioritize, product owners thinks there is some stories needs to be reprioritized. That kind of activity product owners do and navigates one story and do the sprint planning and then navigate to another sprint. So picking the stories from product backlog, that product owner does. What Scrum Master does, Scrum Master at the time of sprint planning validate the capacity and resource allocation. We'll look into that in much details during the rest of the course. Scrum Master also ensure that all the stories are assigned to a owner. So here this owner is not who will be working on that. Normally we assign one owner to each stories who take the responsibility of demonstrating that, and another responsibility will be enforce allocation over commitment. So we have a capacity, so Scrum Master facilitate and ensure that we are actually filling up our capacity, not overloading, not underloading is there, and also at the same time monitor the sprint backlog, how it is emerging, because during the sprint planning we are committing stories by stories, and we are building up our sprint backlog. Development team, they also have a couple of responsibility. They try to understand the sprint goal, what the Scrum product owner is saying. Then if the story is not groomed or not estimated, they participate on grooming and estimation also. Then understand the requirement. If it is a new story came up, they try to understand that requirement as well. They also do task breakout and allocating the task to themselves. They estimate the task and then validate capacity allocation, how much capacity they had and how much they are actually allocating to them, and then commit user story. So finally the development team say, okay, we are committing this user story, let's go to the next user story and do the planning for that story. Now other team member, there may be a cross-functional team, there may be some other technical SMEs group. They provide necessary inputs, provide suggestion and expert comments if required, and take participates on that. Now let's talk about after sprint planning what we do. So after sprint planning, the product owner validate the goal versus commitment. So product owner validate, okay, this is the goal I had at the beginning and what are the stories we have committed, are those matching with each other or are they aligned with each other. Scrum Master also circulate the sprint planning summary. That summary we'll be talking about later in this video. Then also verify a day one burn down, so you just have a very quick look on how the burn down is coming up and what will be the expected or ideal line is showing how feasible it is based on the previous few sprint that we have completed. And then start working on preparing the physical Scrum board. So nowadays many team don't have that physical Scrum board because everything is in ALM like Rally, Jira or TFS or version 1. They have that virtual board, so they don't create a physical board, and because of the distributed team, physical board is not accessible to everyone if we kept it in one place. So that is most of the places is not there, but still if in a co-located team they try to manage a physical board for a visibility from your desk, or it's a very good visibility and transparency to have. Now development team, they do a tasking if it is pending. They start the construction after sprint planning. Now, sometimes when I am talking about tasking if pending is if they feel okay right now they don't have much time on the sprint planning, so they will do the tasking. So they do tasking after that, and they together talk with the team and make a execution strategy based on the priority, the dependencies, how the execution strategy will be. They also participate on Scrum board preparation. If we are making this physical board, they help the Scrum Master and participate to make the Scrum board ready. And also if there is any dependencies with the cross-functional team there, they started talking with cross-functional team coordination. Okay, so now let's talk about the prerequisite. To do a sprint planning meeting, if we have these 4 prerequisites: prioritize backlog, groomed and estimated story, definition of ready, and planned capacity. So prioritize backlog, if you have already watched the video of prioritization, you know what exactly prioritization is and how we'll be able to make our backlog ready in a prioritized manner. If you have already watched the video for backlog grooming, you know what exactly grooming is, and this estimation is a story point estimation, if the stories are story point estimated or not. So these are the prerequisites before sprint planning. If we have that, then our sprint planning will be very short and very crisp. And then all team used to have a definition of ready. So before we say this story is ready to commit or not, we should have a definition of ready for that particular team, and a planned capacity for that particular sprint. How many resources are there, who have what vacations, which day who will be working, what is their allocation to this project, how many %, and based on that we'll get an estimated effort hours for that sprint duration for individual team members. So those are the prerequisites we need to have a very crisp sprint planning. Okay, so now we'll talk about duration of sprint planning, how much a sprint planning meeting should take. So normally if we talk about a sprint planning meetings time, by book it says 2 into number of weeks per sprint. So if you have a 2-week sprint, it will be 4 hours. If you have a 3-week sprint, it will be of 6 hours. And if it is a 4-week sprint, normally we not suggest to have a 4-week sprint. We suggest 2 to 3 weeks of sprint is the ideal sprint duration. So 2 into number of weeks. So that says if you have 2-week sprint, 4 hours of sprint planning, and 3 week of sprint, 6 hours of sprint planning, and 4 week of sprint, 8 hours of sprint planning. And what we actually do within that sprint time. So if we actually do defining a sprint goal, identify stories, groom the stories, understand the requirement of each stories, then identify dependencies, then identify risk, then estimate the story points, plan team capacity, task breakout, task assignment. So if we do all these activities for a 2-week sprint, definitely it will take 4 hours. And normally it says the first half we do defining a sprint goal, and rest of the time we commit user story to meet the goal. But what happen is, if we already talk about the prerequisites, So if we have the prerequisite, we may not have or may not require that much of time. So that much of time in sprint planning. So what are the prerequisite we have? What are the different activities we can have before sprint planning to have the prerequisite ready? So if a product owner have a vision ready, it will be very easy to make ready the sprint goal. If our product backlog is prioritized by a prioritization, then it will be very easy to identify stories. Now if we have a schedule grooming, our backlog have healthy stories ready to start working on, that will also save time during sprint planning if we have the prerequisite ready. Then understand the requirement, understanding about what exactly the story is, that can also be done by grooming. If we have a schedule grooming, then we'll be able to save time. Then identify dependencies or identify risk, estimate story points, that everything can be done by grooming. And then capacity. Before sprint planning, we can spend half an hour time, the Scrum Masters and the team, and define the capacity of the team, so that we don't need to spend time of within the sprint planning duration. And if we actually do all these activities before sprint planning, then you will see that we are not needing that many hours. That says 2 weeks sprint is 4 hours for sprint planning. We will not be needing that much of time. Now let's as you see that image, what are the prerequisites we had? So the prerequisite, we had a definition of ready, goal, that's the sprint goal, groomed and prioritized backlog, and a planned capacity. And what are the activities we had? We had these are the activities. And how we'll be having those prerequisites ready? If we actually map this vision of PO, will help saving time on the goal, and rest of the activity will make the prerequisite ready for the groomed and prioritized backlog, and your capacity planning will save the time for having your capacity ready. So all these activities save time for the sprint planning meeting. Now we'll be talking about step by step sprint planning, what we actually do in sprint planning. So before we go step by step, let me just take you through to the entire Scrum process and where the sprint planning actually fits. So we have a product backlog item, and we have few ongoing activities in our regular day-to-day life. We have few definitions. We'll talk about what are those. So we have ongoing activities are prioritization and grooming. So it takes input from the product backlog and have the prioritization, and it's take input from the grooming and make a groomed prioritized PBI. So that's product backlog item. And at the same time, we already have a definition of ready and definition of done that we'll be using in our day-to-day life at the time of sprint planning or committing stories. So this is one area on your Scrum life cycle. Now within the sprint time box, what we do is we do a sprint planning, then we do a capacity planning, and then we do sprint planning. And this capacity planning takes input from, these are the prerequisites, remember, groomed and prioritized PBI, definition of ready, and your capacity planning. So these 4 areas is done, and now it's generate a sprint goal. This came up from your product owner visions. So these are the 2 outputs we get. This is a sprint backlog and a sprint goal. Those are come from the sprint planning. So we take 3 input, groomed and prioritized backlog, the definition of ready, and capacity planning we do a sprint planning, and this is the output. And rest you then do your normal day-to-day daily stand-up and sprint execution, and then you go to the sprint review, and you go to you do your retrospective. So your sprint review take inputs from the sprint goal and definition of ready, and finally make the potential shippable product. So that's the sprint Scrum life cycle is. Now here we'll be talk about only the sprint planning. So if we talk about sprint planning, what are the main areas we have? We have the sprint planning and the prerequisite that we need. So here we have a groomed and prioritized product backlog and definition of ready capacity planning. This is the output. Okay, now let's talk about only the sprint planning. So we are just focusing only sprint planning. So sprint planning actually have two different parts. One is defining the sprint goal. So sprint goal, we talk about the product owner and the development team negotiate with each other and finally decide, okay, for this particular sprint this is our sprint goal. And sometimes this goal is we'll talk about that goal, what exactly the goal is, and they generate a sprint goal. Let's talk about a little more about a sprint goal. So sprint goal is actually the target audience of the sprint goal is mainly the stakeholders or for the reporting purpose and the development team, so that they can have some goal to start working on. And also this sprint goal is reviewed at the time of sprint review. When the sprint is ending, we get a sprint review meeting. We verify what was our goal and how much we have achieved from this sprint. So few of the example that I can say, implement the login screen functionality. That's a very high level, and that particular sprint goal is mentioned on your ALM, or print it, put it on your physical board, keep it somewhere visible. And another example is implement the functionality to enable credit card payment on shopping cart. So that is actually sprint goal. Let's talk about the different side of the sprint planning, what we do. So we know we have these three prerequisites. So from groom story, we have stacks of stories, those are prioritized, and we'll pick the first product backlog item, that's a user story. And then we talk about, okay, if the story is not groomed, we groom it. If it is not estimated, we estimate it. That's a story point estimation, not an effort estimation. And then we talk about whether there is any dependencies, we map the dependencies. If there is any risk, we talk about the risk, and that way we make the story meet definition of ready and proceed further. The next step, we do task breakout. So every team member is actually talk with each other and make tasks like development, analysis, code review, testing, that kind of tasks they create as a part of or children of each product backlog item, or you can say a story. And along with that, this capacity you are seeing, that was a prerequisite we had. Next, we do a task assignment by looking into the capacity, who have how many hours remaining, and based on that whether we will be able to assign to this particular resource or not. And then we estimate the task hours. So once we estimate the task hours, also we verify with the capacity, this person is estimating 5 hours, whether he have 5 hours of capacity of left or not. And at the same time, we actually update our capacity. If this person is updating 5 hours for this story, update -5, we'll go into that in details. So we are updating the capacity here. So let's talk about what exactly we are doing by updating capacity, how we are updating capacity. So to do that, I will take an example of few of the team members. So assume there are 5 team members we have, or instead you can say there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 team member we have, and maybe we can have mark here. I don't have it. So 7 team members are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here I have showing, okay, right now in the screen I can able to fit 5 team members in this structure. And this is the area of Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is updating, okay, this is the capacity initially I had, and capacity available is completely whatever their initial planned capacity was. If you want to learn more about capacity planning, there is another video and article on the agiledigest.com. You can go through and understand what is capacity planning is and how we are getting these values. Now we picked one PBI, that is, for an example, US 2064, and we asked everyone, okay, make the task breakdown and estimate the task. So everyone, what happened is if we have everyone have a laptop, or we are meeting in one place, they can update then and there by creating the task on each item if we are having a ALM. But if we don't have a laptop, they write it down, or they can update in one person have laptop, they can create the task and have the estimation by getting the values from every team members. To save time, what I suggest everyone that okay, let's just update in Excel, and from Excel we'll create those tasks based on whatever we have entered or captured in our ALM tool. So what they captured is, for an example, everyone have a notepad and we are talking about user story 2064. First we take the story and everyone says okay, Alex will take analysis 6 hours, development 10 hours and unit testing 3 hours. Everyone is writing that, and at the end everyone says okay, we have already noted down what are the task hours it will be, and total of for this user story, Alex will be needing 19 hours, Amit will be needing 18 hours, Dhanushri will be taking 32 hours, Dennis will be 8 hours and Mark will be 25 hours. They update the Scrum Master. Scrum Master at the same time is updating the same value by creating a task breakdown and adding this story here in, they updated what they said, and the committed capacity is calculated and the available capacity is there, and says okay, what is their load is after committing this story. This is their total load as of now. Now if we talk about the next story, once we have started working on picked up the next story, everyone will do the same task breakout and update the total task hours they need. Then they update the Scrum Masters. Scrum Master will add the stories here and update the capacity tracker. So this is an Excel I have. I will show you what exactly the Excel looks like and how that works. And in that way you will be able to get the capacity, how we are loading the resource and who can take the more stories. So once we'll take the next story, we'll see who have available capacity and what skill set, and we'll be picking up that way. Let me quickly show you the Excel that where the Scrum Master usually update, or I ask the Scrum Master to have some Excel instead of updating in the ALM within the sprint planning time. It may take lots of time. If everyone have a laptop, it may not, but if most of the time we don't have a laptop for all the team members. So let's see that Excel. Okay, so this is the Excel the Scrum Master is managing, and till that time, so for an example, one next story will come, so Scrum Master will type, let's say 1 2 3 4 is the user story, and the Scrum Master will be saying okay, this is as 23. You can see that graph is the graph is here changing, and I will say this will be 12, this will be whatever the estimates that is coming. So once it's shoot up going on 12, so it will be turned red, so that it says okay, you cannot have this hours because you don't have that much of capacity available. You had 21 hours of capacity available, so pick some other stories where you think you will be able to complete the task within that hours. For this one you can give it to someone else with the same skill set who can take it. So that way you update the capacity, and how we get this figure, what was the capacity planning was, you can actually look into the another video on capacity planning to find out. Okay, so now we came back to where we had left our sprint planning cycle. So once we have our task estimation ready, we'll add this to our sprint backlog, and also ask to pick one more stories from the product backlog, the prioritize and groomed product backlog, and do the same cycle, and we'll continue doing this cycle until we'll be having no more stories available in the product backlog or no more capacity available, which one is right. So till that time we'll be doing it. Now let's talk about what are the deliverables of sprint planning. We already talked about that. This is the very summary. Once we will be having one sprint goal and one sprint backlog. So sprint backlog you saw on the previous slide, how we are generating a sprint backlog and how we'll be having the sprint goal. Let's talk about the summary report of sprint planning. So this is the report that I was talking about earlier. After the sprint planning, the Scrum Masters needs to send some information about the sprint planning, what we did and what we have committed to the team members and the interested party, the stakeholders, the business owners, to let everyone know we already have committed the sprint, and this is the summary of our commitment. So they can mention in an email or in a Word document or in a PDF file by giving this kind of information, the team name and what's the sprint number, what are the sprint goals we have defined, and on the other side you can define the sprint duration, how many days of sprint, what is the start date, what is the end date, and also the sprint schedule, when and what time you are having the daily scrum, when you are planning to have the retrospective, when you are having to have the sprint review, and what is your grooming frequency within that sprint duration, how much it is falling. Similarly, you can actually mention the capacity utilization, so where you can say all the team members' name, what was the full capacity you had, how much capacity you have committed, and the available capacity after your sprint planning, after commitment of all the stories. Secondly, you can also mention in details like what are the stories you have committed with what story points and the task distribution of individual team members. This is again it's up to you how granular you want to make this report to. The commitment summary you can mention like this: how many stories committed, total 11 for this example, and total story points committed is 41. Total capacity you had was 350 hours, committed is 311 hours, and how many total capacity is available after your commitment of the sprint. And then you can also mention the list of all the user stories with the title, what's the story point, and what the user ID. So this, all the three areas you can club into one report and send the report like this to everyone as a sprint planning summary, so that everyone will get an idea, okay, this is team X or team Y's sprint planning summary. So for every sprint planning, after the end of the sprint planning, once the task distribution is done, everything is finalized, you are about to hit the ground to start the execution. Before that, send this report to everyone. So normally Scrum Master used to do this. And finally, let's talk about the benefits we can have from the sprint planning. So the first one is goal visibility. Definitely the product owner have a big goal and he split it up those big goal into small goals, and we are getting a visibility of that particular sprint's goal before we start the execution. So the team members, the stakeholders, or the business analyst, or the business sponsors, they are getting a visibility of incremental goal that we are actually targeting for this sprint, and every sprint they will be having some goal. So the visibility of goal you can have from the sprint planning meeting. Then you can have a scope visibility. So after the planning, you can actually have the visibility of what exactly the scope the team will be working on, what are the stories they will be working, what are the different task items they will be having. The entire scope will be visible once you are done with your sprint planning meeting. Then you can have the task discovery. So what are the granular level tasks you have, who will be doing how many hours of analysis, how many hours of development, who will be doing testing on what particular stories. Every details you will get the visibility after this sprint planning meeting. Then you can do the optimal use of your capacity. Whatever the capacity you have planned, you are making the task, aligning the task with the capacity, and stopping your sprint planning for further commitment of new stories once your task is committed. So by that way you will be able to visualize the total task that you had and how much you have actually committed for, and you will be able to optimize the use of your capacity. You will be save on your scope creep, because you are not leaving any capacity. You will be able to complete all the stories because you are committing based on your capacity, so that will increase your commitment reliability also. So that again, it will improve your team collaboration. The team mutually work together and talk about all the risk, dependencies, tasks, who have how many hours capacity available, and that's increase the team capacity of lots of discussion between team. Now again, improve the commitment reliability that I was talking about. This is again, whatever the capacity you had, you are committing based on that. So there is a high chance of completing every stories that you have committed, and that will improve your commitment reliability. And the controlled scope creep. So if you are actually committing the stories based on your capability and capacity, there will be very high chances of not removing any stories from your scope that you have committed, and also you will not be needing to add any new stories during the sprint duration, because you will be finding, okay, we have more bandwidth and needs to more stories. So those are the very high level benefits of sprint planning. There will be many more once you will start working on sprint plannings, and I think that's all for a high level understanding of sprint planning. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. All the links that I mentioned in this video are available at the description below in this YouTube video. I'll be come up with few more video on the ALM section of sprint planning and on some other agile areas. Till that time, have a wonderful day and don't forget to subscribe.